Good afternoon, everybody. How are we enjoying GCAP? Yeah? Yeah? Super excited, everybody. Everyone must just be like holding it all in for the AGDAs or something like that. All right, so for those that don't know me, my name is Adrian Webb. My full-time job is the manager of virtual worlds at the Australian Defence Simulation and Training Centre. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Serious Games Australia New Zealand in conjunction with Kathleen Lynn and Dale Liniger. I am been a strong advocate for serious games for a little while now, I guess you could say. But before I get started, I just want to do the government type thing where I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. So I've introduced myself, but we have an amazing panel with a great aspect of diversity into the different fields that they work in. I will let them introduce themselves because they do that much better than I will. And we'll start at this side and going that way.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Emre Deniz. I am a developer slash designer slash biz dev person that's working in VR, MR, AR in the serious games field for the past maybe 5 years now. I've worked in games for health as well as defense industries and astronautics and aerospace. And yeah, I was the founder and director of a company called Opaque Space that built games in collab with NASA. And nowadays I do business development for the Opaque Media Group in the field of both serious games and simulation training.
I don't really like having to go after that. Hi, I'm McLean. I'm the product director of Third Sense. So we're a North Sydney-based studio, been around for nearly 20 years now, but I only just recently joined about 6 months ago. We make games largely for large corporates around education, but also health and rehabilitation and business and entertainment and all kinds of things. Before that, though, I ran a small indie studio in Sydney called Robot House and made narrative games. But I also run a mentorship program for entry-level women in games called The Working Lunch. So that's sort of my spin on this panel.
I'm Matthew Dyet. So I'm the producer from Stirfire Studios. Before I was working for Stirfire, I was also doing contract work for a bunch of different organisations in Western Australia doing serious games, especially SciTech Discovery Centre that do educational stuff. Since working with Stirfire, though, we've also done stuff for a bunch of other ones, government organisations, non-profits, museums. So I basically help out the team, making sure the projects get done. I also dabble a little bit in designing them. When I was doing contract work, I was also doing art. I do a bit of everything like any producer typically does.
Hi, I'm Jess Gates, and I am an independent game developer specialising in serious games particularly. I am also an accessibility consultant, and I'm a serious games student up on the Sunshine Coast. Previous to this, I worked in the disability industry and had studied in that field, and sort of did a bit of a shift into game design and game development. And I like to make games about ethical and social issues, and particularly telling stories of marginalised people.
Alrighty. So we'll get into the questions because we have a few and we want to be able to take full advantage of the depth of knowledge on the table. So I'll ask, starting with you, Emre, what is one thing from games that you think translated well from the games industry to the serious or applied games field?
I think the ability for us to contextualize through both narrative and composition, even character development, and create a sense of empathy inside of games to specific subject matters and experiences is something that I believe is translated significantly and importantly into the serious game sector. The ability for us to be able to tell stories that educate, that challenge and that even critique subject matter so that people can learn things and assess themselves or to gain insight has been really important. Yeah.
Yourself, Ellie?
Yeah, so I've personally been really surprised coming into largely for games for education and for medical rehabilitation has been sort of my focus in the last 6 months. I've personally been really surprised. I thought that there would be a lot more focus on the mechanics and trying to sort of take these training protocols and turn them into ways to play with things, and that's certainly a big part of it. But what's been most applicable from my time in an indie studio is actually tone mapping and thinking about narrative and the player's emotional journey. And that's really been the most effective tool that I've had in my toolkit that's translated really well to being able to really put yourself in the user's shoes and think, how do we want them to feel, and then work backwards from there. And it's a tool that a lot of people in the space that I've come into weren't familiar with. So it was quite rewarding for me from an indie perspective. I was like, cool, I made this game about a vacuum and this is how we did the narrative journey. And they're like, oh, that makes total sense for this musical hearing rehabilitation game for some reason. So that one's been a huge one for me, really thinking about individual emotional journeys of players.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been how excited a client often ends up being when they realise that they have testable outcomes from the work that we do. So by providing them, so players express their mastery over a concept by overcoming the challenges that you place in front of them. So if you want them to learn, say, for instance, to stay between the flags in a safe beach safety game, they will learn that by the time that you've set them through, keep all these people between the flags. They will understand that concept by the time they've finished. And then you have your testable outcome where they're having to do a quiz or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, most of what I would say has kind of been summed up there, but I particularly enjoy having people who previously wouldn't have played a game being engaged with something and being able to show them that it can be a very useful way to get that information across. I think that's something that I really enjoy, is getting to tap into that side of it.
I would just add to what you were saying, Matt, as well, that I think it's actually made me a better game designer, having to think really specifically about the outcomes and being able to show what those outcomes are.
Yep.
And so my core loops are a lot tighter and my design documents make a lot more sense now.
I love the idea of making gameplay around rules that you wouldn't normally think needs rules. It needs gameplay, for instance. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are just a few rules in the various different fields that we work in. I'll go to yourself, Jess. As a student, what piqued your interest in pivoting to looking at creating applied or serious games?
Well, it is a long story and it does involve a 2 a.m. Google search. But I worked in disability and studied disability for several years, and over that time I had various experiences in the disability industry, and some of them were okay and some of them were less than okay and some of them were outright horrible. And I became very disillusioned with the way the systems were set up and the power imbalance and the difficulty to make any real change there. I, at the same time, was running a lot of kids' camps and icebreaker games and really could see the power that games had as a way to allow people to connect and express themselves. I ended up on Google at 2 a.m. because I was having a very bad night of sleep and Googled degrees about games, found the degree that I'm currently doing and saw that it encapsulated all the things that I thought games could do in terms of actually being able to make change. So I'm now looking at the ways that I can make the changes that I wanted to make in the industries that I've been in or been associated with, but doing it from a game design perspective of changing attitudes rather than being in the workplace, trying to change attitudes through simply just being there and advocating that way.
Games are more engaging than posters?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. You wouldn't have thought it, but yes.
What about yourself, Matt?
Mine came through Expo. So way back in the day in Perth, we had this expo called GO3. And there was a speaker there that was actually talking about a serious game that he was working on. And it was in this tiny, cramped little room that maybe had like 12 seats. And at this point, I hadn't even actually gotten into game development yet as a study. So I jumped in there out of curiosity. And he was talking about this mining simulation that was to teach the people down in the mines how to actually stay safe in case of an emergency. Because if you're down in the mines, you have limited oxygen, and so if there's a cave-in, your oxygen supply suddenly becomes limited, and so now you've got to get to oxygen in special like first aid units and that sort of thing. But you can't get there too fast because if you start running, you make yourself out of breath and you collapse on the floor. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, this sounds like an incredible horror game. Like, I love the idea. That sounds so cool. I'd play that. I would really play that. And just that whole idea that this is a training program that actually sounds fun really excited me about the possibilities of, designing something like that people would walk away from saying, hey, I've actually learned something, but I had fun learning something. Yeah.
All right. I'll go to yourself, Emre, because you work in various different fields. What are some of the similarities that you see between all those different fields? And do you think that some of those similarities are helps or hindrances to creating serious games?
Both. Because you have advocates and evangelists, and then you have skeptics and people who can be quite cynical about games. The biggest issue that the industry faces, I believe, is one that's holistic to games, is that it is often gate-kept by people that believe that games is Pac-Man in an arcade machine and only children play games. Children play games, sure, but adults play games too. Everybody plays games. Games, as a concept of play, is one of the founding pillars of our species. And the idea that we associate games as being a time-waste activity or something that's derived of value is a huge problem, because serious games is trying to add meaningful value other than entertainment to something that already intrinsically has a lot of obstacles and a lot of opposition. So finding the people that are strong advocates for games, techniques, technologies, concepts, as well as in a more holistic sense, is always very rewarding in the industry, whereas bumping into skeptics and cynics, cynics that tend to hold a lot of power and sway over the funding of these programs tends to be a little bit more problematic than I'd like.
And do you think that some of the statistics from different reports, like the Digital Australia, or some of the statistics that you were using in your talk yesterday, do you think they help as well to try and educate those people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thankfully, we're shifting the needle away from, I guess, an informed, balanced debate into asking people why they're so against something, when the data is overwhelmingly in support of this being a very powerful export-driven industry as games, and then the serious game sector being one that's rapidly increasing in not just value, but in application and the good that it's able to do across a range of industries. So, I guess the conversation is changing from calling them skeptics to being a bit more nasty, but, that's...
Yeah, I've definitely found that some of our clients, fun has been a very bad word.
And games.
Yeah, and games, yeah.
Yeah, I know I went through a little bit later where we were calling them interactive design, and for some reason that was so much more acceptable than games. And then I think it was about a year ago, I was like, no, that's not helping get a positive reinforcement for games. And so I've changed it back and now use games.
We've gamified games.
So to build off that, Ali, what do you think would be your top tip or selling point for using games as a medium for non-games people?
I think it ties in a bit to what Emre was saying, in that it is that everybody plays games. So at Third Sense, we have a process called our collaborative design workshop, which is essentially where you get the people from the client side who are into the idea of games, and then a whole bunch of people who are not into the idea of games, and we take them through a whole day of teaching them about what games are, different types of games, all the types of people who play games. We use a lot of data from IGEA's Digital Australia report, and by the end of it, they're all game designers. Cool. We have them out with flip chart paper and post-it notes and Sharpies, and they're all split into groups designing their own games. And that's kind of one of the most magical things that I've ever witnessed. And it's part of the reason that I joined the company, was seeing the way that you take essentially a boardroom full of people who at the start of the meeting are, we don't play games, my kid plays Fortnite, and that's it. And then by the end of it, they're like, but the achievement system, how would it work? And that's pretty amazing.
What about yourself, Jess?
Just to follow on from that, everyone plays games for sure, and the way that I sort of build on that for people who are very, no, games, I don't do that, just in the conversations that I have with people, is to find what they think they are very passionate about. Some people are very passionate about gardening or about playing football or about whatever else, and then going, well, did you know there's this game that lets you do this? Well, did you know there's this game that looks at this? Well, did you know games are also helping with like team strategy and things like that? And trying to relate something in their world back to the idea of what a game can be, so that they can then relate it to, oh, I'm passionate about that thing, why am I not passionate about this? Yeah, I think that's been very helpful when I've had to have those conversations with people in my life who are like, nope.
I've actually found that, and we sort of, gamification is like a bit of a dirty word at the moment, but we have found that using gamification as a bridge into explaining what games can be is really powerful too. So if you can point out a way to someone that within their own company something is already gamified, or a system they're already using, like Salesforce is already gamified, then they're a little bit more comfortable with the idea of using game design thinking to create a digital product, and then it becomes a game later.
People don't like to step out on the ledge unless somebody else is out there with them.
Yeah.
No one wants to be first. So Matt, when you're doing pitches to clients, what is the difference that you focus on compared to publisher pitches?
Typically with publisher pitches, they're way less concerned about your budget. Whereas with like a small non-profit or a government organization, they are very, very concerned about, they have a limited budget within which you can work. They usually also have a very, very limited amount of time, because they usually get to you very, very late in their need for that actual project to be a thing. So there's a lot of there's a lot there where you end out very, very often having back and forths with your client in serious games. Whereas when it comes to a publisher, they're a bit more hands off. They just kind of let you, you do your thing. We trust you to get it done. And then if you have any sort of problems, they're usually there supporting you. Whereas when it comes to a serious games client, at least the ones that I've worked with, it's usually us supporting them through the project, even though they're not really doing much except sitting there and getting super excited. Like, I love the idea of somebody sitting down and being like, oh yeah, the achievement system, this is awesome. Because that's been my experience with a lot of our clients, is that once they're involved in the project, they can be a little bit shaky at the start, but once they're into it, they get really into it. I remember sitting down in meetings with people talking about swim speed on Safety Beach, like this minute little detail, but they're talking about, yeah, my kid was playing it though, and they were having a little bit of a hard time keeping up with them. They were moving a little bit too fast, and it's like, this is really cool that we're having a design discussion with people that aren't designers. Whereas publishers, yeah, they're very much usually more hands off, like at least the way that we've approached them. Yeah.
Emre, what about yourself? Because obviously you've had to pitch to a range of different people.
Yeah, big range. Yeah, I love writing. Wait, I should say this in the right tone. I very much enjoy writing quad charts and white papers in order to pitch to simulation clients on interactive experiences that teach skills that may or may not have success and failure states. Otherwise, I love making video game pitches because I use the same deck for like publishers and for defense in the sense that when we present an idea, when we present what a successful product may look like, why it should have traction and data points to support those claims, risk assessment onto why we've considered all the angles of how to make that project successful. What I've found is that the stakeholders in serious games tend to be very invested into the design more than games for entertainment publisher. People can be just like, is it going to sell? Like, what's the pitch? Give me the elevator pitch. Whereas the version of an elevator pitch in the serious games industry tends to be, give me a 4-page white paper with like sourced academic information. So I've enjoyed that a lot, actually. It's been a good part of it.
It helped educate you a bit more in different aspects?
Yeah, and most of the time I don't know what I'm talking about. So, being able to pitch a concept and going on and reading about it and deep diving into that subject matter can give me a lot of insight into something that I previously would not have exposure to.
Yeah, I think that it's basically a matter of the serious games projects usually more interested in the outcomes, whereas the outcomes for a big publisher are financial rather than has somebody learned something. Yeah.
Jess, you made an award-winning game on a very very great subject that was near and dear to you. How did you find doing that experience? And maybe explain for the people what your game was about.
Game is. It's a narrative-based game about a homeless woman who gets her period on the day of a job interview. And essentially the premise is that you have to manage how you're using your sanitary items throughout the day and what you're spending your money on and how you're going about your day. It was a very interesting process in making that because I tried to, as Emre was saying, you do a lot of research, you kind of do a bit of a deep dive into a topic, and in my case it was reading stories and accounts online of people who'd been in similar situations and looking at organisations who were helping people who menstruate who were homeless and exploring the stories that they experience and things like that. And then trying to condense that into a thing that appealed to people who wouldn't otherwise be interested in that kind of thing. So the target audience for it was like young adolescent and young adult males, because they're the people who aren't going to pick up a game like that, and they're the people who aren't going to go and read about menstruation and homelessness. So the way I designed that was very specific to, let's see if you can win this thing. Let's see if you can manage to beat this problem that apparently can be solved by making all these right choices. And spoiler alert, you can't win. So I think a lot of those design decisions came back to how am I taking this serious topic and appealing it to an audience that wouldn't necessarily find it anywhere near interesting.
And how was that when you were pitching that to the teachers and stuff like that? They're all...
My teacher was very on board with the idea. The funnier parts happened when the rest of the class played the idea, because at the end of the the end of the semester, we have a thing where we all get to play each other's narrative games that we'd made, and a 17-year-old boy sat down and played this game about periods and was visibly kind of recoiling from the screen and was quite confronted by it, but later on was talking about how it was it had a lot of heart to it, and there was definitely a real issue kind of there. So originally, people were very much on board with it at the time, which I was quite thankful for, because otherwise, it's kind of terrifying making something like that in a very male-dominated space. So yeah, generally well received by the people who it needed to be well received at the time. Very entertaining to watch 18, 17-year-old boys play it later.
Ali, how do you find partnerships? Because obviously when you're creating serious games, your expertise is in the development process and creating the gameplay mechanics. And obviously the people that are coming to you, their expertise is in the topic itself. How do you find that engagement?
That's generally not my job, so I'm very lucky. We have two really excellent people at our company who handle that. Colin, our CEO, who's been working in this space since the mid-90s, is pretty extraordinary at listening, and it's something that I'm trying to learn, and it's having a mentor like this has been really important to me and to my journey into serious games. And I think like anyone who spends half a day with Emre probably has the same feeling, where you see the way that someone can listen and genuinely deep dive into a topic, and then you see them connecting the dots in their head, and then the examples start coming out and he draws them into the world of games, and it's not a skill that I have yet, to be honest.
You made a game about a vacuum cleaner.
It's true. Yeah. And then it ended up being a game about grief.
You didn't talk to Hoover when you were creating that game?
No, but we did talk to the IP lawyers from iRobot by accident. That's for a different panel.
What about yourself, Matt? Because you were obviously engaging with the Royal Lifesaving area? Yep. Or again, am I pitching the wrong thing to the wrong person?
So what's the question?
How did you find engaging with the Royal Lifesaving as a subject matter expert and yourself as a developing expert?
Okay. So when we first actually started talking to them, the meeting we originally had with them was really funny, because we got in there and we basically heard about the fact that they were looking for a game through another business that they approached. But they were more like apps, not so much games, and they were like, you want to talk to these people. So we go into that meeting with them, And they were basically like, yes, we want to make a game to teach kids about the beach safety rules. And to do this, we've been brainstorming inside the office, and our idea is to make a quiz game. And we were like, that's a terrible idea.
Isn't that just what everyone says?
Yeah, that's exactly what they go to first time. Like, we have to have testable outcomes, so we're going to make a test.
You have to keep score as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And we had literally been brainstorming on the way there because we had so many ideas as to how we could make a game for the Royal Surf Lifesaving Commission. And so in that meeting, we basically pitched them the game that we had discussed in the car on the way to the meeting with them. And they just lit up. They were so excited by the idea of seeing little lifesavers on a mobile screen and being able to, manage this and be a lifesaver yourself to learn the rules by basically enforcing them. And they were such a brilliant client. Like, they were really a dream client for us. Like, their budget was limited, but they were as passionate about it as we were in the end. There was very little friction there to kind of get them on board with the concepts that we had. And it was really like a back and forth discussion where they would tell us interesting things. Like, they gave us a whole bunch of old paperwork to begin with. Like, these are all our posters and everything that we have around that, show the beach safety rules, and we're only really focusing on these ones since, don't drink alcohol on the beach is probably not appropriate for kids, though that might be a funny expansion.
The adults only version.
Yeah. And so from that, we basically went away. We have a excellent designer over at Stirfire that has a background in data analysis and that sort of thing. So she ended up designing a whole bunch of different mechanics. And those basically grew and changed over time. Like, I could go into a deep dive. I did a talk about this last year. But there was a whole bunch of stuff there that kind of just evolved over time through our cooperation with Surf Lifesaving. Yeah.
It's funny how many people don't immediately go to a simulation. When I think about serious games and trying to communicate a real life topic in a game, the first place my brain goes is just simulate it.
Yeah.
But I don't see that coming from clients at all. Yeah, I do have something to add to that though. When you were talking, it tweaked in my head that I think the main thing that we do at Third Sense in order to sort of bring people around to the idea of a game or to introduce them to the concept of a game is largely around starting with what's the problem you want to solve, not what kind of game is it going to be and what color is it and what do the characters look like and what's the story. It ultimately comes down to what's the objective, what issue are you trying to address, and then let's work from there.
Yeah, I know, I get that a lot. A lot of people come through my office and they're looking, I just want to do something with VR. It's like, well, that's not a solution. VR is just a technology. You need to understand your problem. You need to come with me with outcomes that you want, because I can show you all the tech in the world, but if you don't have those outcomes set in your head, in 2 years' time, they're just going to be beautiful paperweights. And that happens a lot, unfortunately, more than it should.
Sounds like you're not VRing hard enough.
God damn it.
Sounds like an AR problem.
Oh, all right then. Don't get me in the AR versus VR debate.
It's not a debate.
I always, I'm going to add to this. I always find people, when I have people come through, it's like, oh, that can't be made into a game. And I always tell the story of a little game that we saw back in 2015, done by Monkey Stack in Adelaide. It was called Project Desal. I think you can still download it on your phones now, but it won the best serious game in Australia, and it went overseas to the International Serious Games competition, and it won Best Mobile and Best Business Game at the International Awards that year in 2015. And the goal of it was to teach the desalination process to kindergarten and year 1 students. And so when people tell me that, oh, that topic can't be made into a game, I tell them that story. And then I say, so if your topic is more boring than the desalination process, sure, can't be made into a game. Haven't seen anyone say that yet.
Yeah. I've definitely found with some of the pitches that clients have come to us with have often really been super high concept stuff that's like we want to inspire people to be interested in something, but there's still a way to make a game around that. Like one of my university courses, we were basically told to make a game to inspire high school students to go into STEM sciences to specifically study nanotechnology, and we basically developed this little game, about you're a scientist. You're actually you're saving this city from rising waters and everything, and building a space elevator to get people off the planet, and it was super exciting. It was a super exciting concept. Like there's always a way to make people interested. Yeah.
I think just going on from what you've both been saying, a lot of people think of serious games and think of them as like, it has to be really, really heavy topics as well. So it needs to be things about mental health, or things about super important military things, or things about super dramatic things. And yeah, desalination plants. Like there's a group of students at uni that are making a game about how to make cocktails. That's their serious purpose, is learning what ingredients go in the cocktail. And they were like, oh, that's a serious game. Like, because it is teaching you a skill that you need to know, and it is doing something beyond just being fun. And I think there's a lot of misconception around a serious game doesn't need to be a very heavy game as well.
Yep. I literally did a talk on this. It was called Serious Games Don't Need to Be Serious.
Can I ask the panel a question?
Yeah, sure.
I'm interested in what everyone thinks of the term serious games, because this is something we talk about a lot internally, is because we don't say that we make serious games, but we do. Where are we at with the term serious games?
It's a funny one because, I have a lot of people, it's like I don't like the term serious games. And like you've heard me today, being using applied games as well, games for education, gamification, there are all these different nuances. I don't know, I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I don't mind serious games. I guess it comes down to what you put the emphasis on behind that. For me, a serious game is something more than just entertainment. It's being able to impart knowledge, even by stealth or enforcing it in the top. But if it's not entertaining, it's not a game in the first place. And that's the whole reason that we're using this medium, is to engage someone entertainment-wise, to keep them engaged in the game.
There are games that are not fun or entertaining, like cricket. But
Why cricket?
that gets a clap? Okay.
I was going to say, do I look like a batter? Am I a bowler? I've got a Shane Warne body, but...
I'm glad you asked, because so that was like a part of the talk yesterday of I think that I don't like distinctions, and I believe that we do ourselves a disservice by removing ourselves from games as a holistic entity because of so much overlap. So the thing that I talked about yesterday was that if a game, moving away from this idea that if a game is conceived for a purpose other than entertainment, it's a serious game, we should be instead saying when a game is used, deployed for a purpose other than entertainment, or purely for entertainment, then it can be referred to as a serious game or applied game or gamified experience, interactive experience. So I think that the more that we can kind of wedge ourselves back into this sphere, the less that it's possible for people, even in a federal capacity, like a government capacity, to make distinctions on, we're not going to support games, but we're going to support serious games, or we view this industry as separate from this industry, because in reality they're not. Like we know that they're called games, except cricket.
Okay.
I don't know why I'm looking at you. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just going to say League of Legends players are way more serious about games than...
That's true. Yeah.
Jess?
Yeah, we have an ongoing thing at in the serious games degree that none of us particularly identify with the name serious games, because often we have to then explain what's a serious game, why are they not fun, and there's a lot more like, are they not fun? It's like, yeah. But finding that word that does actually qualify what we mean is very difficult. So for me, I often default back to serious games purely because I can, and it's something that I'm familiar with, but yeah, we need a better word.
Yeah, it's like the clients understand.
Yes.
Like that's the big thing. But I'm totally with Emre. It's just games. They're games. So. Yeah.
What about yourself, Ali?
Yeah, I don't know yet. I think what's interesting to me is where the lines blur and games that might have, I think as well, like how do we define something as a serious game because it was made for a purpose other than entertainment, or because it's being used for a purpose other than entertainment? Because when you look at like something like Kerbal Space Program, where people are actually using it to learn things, but also it's an entertainment game that you can buy on Steam to play for fun. And so I think I agree with Emre that the more we can break down those walls,
Nice.
the more interesting the space will become.
It's always interesting to see how games that are just used for entertainment. I think in the DA18 report, it was Helen Stuckey who was talking about how some people over in Europe were using Left 4 Dead as ethics in their ethics classes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's like no one at Left 4 Dead probably thought about that, but it's now being used as a tool to do that. What about the whole, film have documentaries, and that's an accepted term, and everyone, documentaries is its own classification and all that kind of stuff. Is there a similarity or not, because games are games and films are films?
Yeah, and some documentaries are more entertainment than documentary as well. Yeah.
Mockumentaries.
I was thinking more like Making a Murderer Season 2. Anyone else watching that? Yeah.
There's Gonzo, like the kind of like gritty documentaries as well. Genres, basically. They become, we have a lot of parallels with the film industry and with literature and music, but we also tend to be like our own little beast as well, so we're just still trying to figure that out as we go. I mean, we're relatively to those mediums, we're actually a pretty young kind of industry. Yeah. Trying to find our feet, I guess.
And just trying to find those right terms. And let the sand stop shifting beneath our feet. Well, I've got one last question, then we'll open it up to the audience. And it allows you guys to do a bit of creativity. If you were to approach any industry to create their industry award-winning game, what would it be and why? And we'll start with Emre.
I've only had like the start of this panel to actually read that question, but because I lied to him earlier and said that I've read all the questions, and I hadn't. I only read the first 3.
So I sent them at least a couple of days ago.
Look, we can get into details later, but if I could, I would like mandatorily have everybody in this country jump into a VR headset, like 40 at a time, into a little dinghy boat, and make you in real time go from Indonesia to Northern Australia, and then experience what it's like to have to go through the conditions of emigrating and migrating to this country, to escape like everything that you would want to escape from if you're raising a family. And you don't get to leave the room until you go through the experience, basically, or you don't get the right to vote. And if you can go through that, because you said I could do anything, right? So I'm a dictator.
I said any industry,
I'm in the industry of dictatorship. So
I'd like to say that these views are his own and not representative of any government department.
None yet. But the idea being that if you can go through an interactive experience with such an empathetic recreation of that subject matter and still feel like you have a political or a human opinion that is contrary to what those people are experiencing, and it doesn't have to be just refugees, it could be anything, then I guess kudos. Like, that's how you actually feel about that subject, and you may actually have the right to vote on that opinion or something like that. The more education that we can have that is less about populist media and more about, I guess, proper empathetic connection to that subject matter is probably going to be better. Yeah.
Okay. Matt.
Okay.
Try following that one.
I already have a perfect plan for this. It's all right. I'm going to take an already pre-existing game series with lots of awards and turn it into a serious game.
Okay.
So, my idea is that science communication's currently got this whole problem of convincing people that climate change is a real problem. So I'm going to take the whole Mass Effect series and replace Reapers with climate change. And now you play a climate scientist that's going out into the galaxy or into the world and doing a whole bunch of climate science research and connecting the dots to actually show that, oh, this is actually human influence. And you keep on going back to the government and they're like, nope, there's no problem. And they keep doing that over and over again until the world just gets destroyed in 3.
Jess.
I think I create a new answer to that question like every day, because there are a lot of games that I'd like to make, but in particular something that I think a game could be really powerful in exploring would be teaching consent and sexuality and safe sex and relationship dynamics to young people living with an intellectual disability. Because sex ed doesn't do a lot. It does less if you're not a cis hetero-abled person, and I think that having an engaging, interactive medium that could explore a topic like that could create a lot of better outcomes for a lot of people.
Yep.
Goddamn right. Yeah. That's cool. Ali?
They already made good pizza, great pizza, so I'm gonna work on Emre's game, I think. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I regret asking that. No, it's fine. All right. So, questions from the audience. We've answered everything, 100%.
Same question back to you.
Me? Yeah, that's good. Yeah. If I, you know what? I haven't even thought of that. There you go.
And you made fun of me.
And I wrote the question. Any industry. I don't know. I guess for me it would be helping people to understand, because I'm so passionate about this industry, in the games industry. Maybe creating a game to help people understand about games, and creating and showcasing the benefits that they can do. It's very meta. You know, we're Inception here, people. But just showcasing all the benefits, and you can pull in the statistics from all the different reports that are done, and then you can pull in that one report that shows that games are negative, and then you just bombard it with the 20 that show that it's positive, and all that kind of stuff. I think it would be difficult because then you've got to try and get it into the hands of non-gamers. But I think for me, that would be, I'm so passionate about this industry that that's probably what I would do. Hopefully that's the right answer.
I think that's a really good idea. Like, so take a game dev tycoon, but you have to be ethical.
Oh.
All right, Jess.
So we've already had some really good points about how to get organisations on board with the idea of having a game. What can we do when there are individuals on that side who are averse to the idea of any elements that may look fun? Anything they're like, no, not like that. That's not the kind of game we want. Experienced that a lot.
Creating a game that's not fun.
Well, when the organisation is averse to ideas that they think are fun, so like all the buttons are too flashy, or like all the players are too much fun, they must be doing it enough. That kind of
Okay.
response they get from those organisations.
Who wants to tackle that one first?
Sure, I will. Because Jess has already heard this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So that nanotechnology game that I was talking about from university was managed by a teacher. So she's in education, and education has very, very strict rules about, you've got to meet the curriculum. And so this awesome game concept we had eventually got burned down into just a quiz game because it was the only way that she felt that you could show outcomes. If I knew now what I knew then, I would have been going and pulling examples for her and basically bringing her into a meeting and saying, okay, so here's a bunch of games that will actually teach you something about something, right? They'll make you care about a concept, or they're going to make you feel something, or you're going to walk away with a better understanding for something, right? I think the primary reason those people are usually so resistant to something that's fun is because they have this impression that the only way that people are going to walk away with any sort of knowledge is if they can actually answer a series of questions about that thing, rather than walking away with a general understanding, right? I'm not quite sure if games are at the point, unless you make something very, very specific and very, very simulation-y, to actually teach that really deep information where you can, have a math simulator where you walk away understanding algebra, right? Like, I don't think we can do that yet necessarily with it still being fun. That's what education's there for, right? So it really comes down to a question of what they're trying to achieve. Because if they're out for a game but they don't want something that's fun, they're probably barking up the wrong tree in the first place, right? So it's really kind of questioning that.
I think it's all about balancing something being fun versus something being trivialized, and they aren't the same thing.
Yes.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
I'd say one of the things is gameplay limits. So a lot of people are worried because it's too fun that they'll just continually play it and play it and play it and play it. And that's, games commercially, that's what they're meant to be doing, is being able to continually get people back to play their game. And in the serious games world, that kind of doesn't work because you're on work time when you're playing those games. And I think I saw it really well advertised when I've seen the AVA system, in that they have 3 stages of education, which is partial mastery, full mastery, and burnout. And partial mastery is when you've just touched on it.
Yep.
And full mastery is when you've got the concept and the idea. And burnout is when there is absolutely nothing more you can learn from it. And when there is nothing more that you can learn from it, then once they've hit that, then the idea is to move them on to the next one. And whether that just means you can't play the game anymore or something like that. But I think that's a way to try and counter that. So it can still be fun, but there are limits to avoid them just playing games at work all day, in essence.
Yeah, I mean, this is all about expectation, but also messaging management too. Some people have pretty strong views on what they view games to be because they may project problems that they have with how they've experienced games or how they view games. Like, my kid plays Fortnite all day, therefore games are bad. Yeah. And it's like, cool, like they're 2 separate things though. Like, your kid plays Fortnite all day, 12 hours a day. That's a separate problem to using gamification to meet objectives and goals that you wanna accomplish. We've had a lot more success in asking for a lot of input from someone who doesn't like games to say, all right, well, what do you want to do, or what do you think we should do? What's something that what do you consider to be success? What do you think to be failure? And then maybe we can make that as outcomes to decisions. We have in recent times stopped playing eggshells when it comes to just saying their games. And I think that is very recent, and it comes from a position of privilege that we exercise a lot, but I'm hoping that things get a little bit easier as games become much more mainstream than they are now.
Jess, do you have anything to add?
Not particularly. I tend not to make games that are fun. In most of my games end up with people in really awful situations, so a lot of the time I argue that they're engaging and they're not fun, so I would handle those conversations talking about what the person meant by it's too fun or they're having too much fun, because if they're engaging, then I would say that's a win even if they're not enjoying themselves.
Yeah, I have a bad habit of interchanging fun with engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At times.
That's right. If you're imparting that learning outcome, then that's the main goal of any of these type of things, isn't it? Yeah. We've got 3 minutes. I'm going to go with Cam. Still got his hand up.
I was wondering, I've got a 2-part question, so I'm sorry.
we got 3 minutes, so it's going to be fun.
Sweet. What are your thoughts on the term non-fiction game? And if you were to think about it from that perspective instead of serious. But then the second part is, in all your research and everything that you have all done for serious games, what inspired you the most?
Oh shit! We don't have 3 minutes for that.
I've never heard the term non-fiction game.
I've not heard it.
I just came up with it. So.
Yeah, so, but I can think of examples of a lot of games that treat themselves as historical fact when there's a lot of opinion in there. So it's kind of hard to teach that sort of thing, or to have a game where you could teach history without necessarily have it be somehow have your own personal biases appear in that thing, right? which is very dangerous territory to kind of march. But if we're talking, it depends on what sort of non-fiction we're talking about, right? Because that's fairly broad. Yeah. But if we're talking history specifically, yeah, kind of difficult to do properly.
It comes down to we're borrowing from another medium, obviously in books. So do then documentary games come as well? I think we keep on borrowing from all these other mediums, where I think we need to create a standpoint for ourselves, as games are an original medium.
Yeah.
Yes, they might borrow little aspects, but they are the outcomes and the reason that we play them versus going to films and books is because they are such a unique medium in and of themselves.
If you're talking specifically like a term instead of serious games, which I think is what you mean, yes, okay, yeah. I don't know. I don't really think it's a good one.
Anybody else?
Because you can still learn things from a fictional book, right? So, yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Anybody else?
What about the second part of the question?
Yeah, what inspired you?
Sorry for the
What inspired? The reason that I got into what my job role, and it's very dumb, is the advertisement said, "Do you like serious games?" And I said, "Oh, I play games, and I play them pretty seriously. I'll give it a go." And I was just very lucky to get that job. And considering the experience that I had at the time and stuff like that, it's like, how did I get this job? And I asked my bosses later, and they were like, because you had a passion. And passion, as we heard this morning, can be used and abused as well. But I was very lucky, and I was able to, and I had a lot of good support internally, and that really drove me into this serious game stream and be able to be an advocate, seeing when I was going to the simulation conferences, seeing the such similarities between the two. And so that's why when I'm at simulation conferences, I talk about talking to the games industry and utilising those skill sets. And when I'm at the games industry conferences, I'm talking about simulation and that collaboration aspect. Again, trying to be the bridge between. So good.
I think what it comes down to for me in the end is whether it's a serious game or not, the thing that I love most about making games is the positive impact that they can have on people. Those are the projects that I've really enjoyed the most whenever we've done them. Like, my favourite non-serious game that Stirfire's ever done was Simply the Machine, and because that was just this really hopeful game, about if whether or not it's climate change that ended the world, or if it was some gigantic Armageddon event, there was still hope there to kind of regrow things, and that was just a really beautiful project to work on because of that, right? Like, you could walk away from it going, wow, I feel kind of hopeful from that. Like, that's what keeps me in the games industry, period. Not just serious games, but like making games that do good. Yeah.
All right, we've got to. Yeah, let's go quick. Go, Jess. Go.
Running kids' icebreaker games on camp. I loved the people connection. I loved what you could do with a space and nothing other than like you telling a story. So that's what inspired me. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, and I'd ask everyone to thank our panelists.